Well, why do I have to do it?
Because you owe me rent. You can't keep living here without earning your keep.
This is discrimination! And on top of that, you're having me review cat things.
Yes, well, it's either that or I throw you into the room with the real cats. You already lost one eye. I'm sure you don't want to lose another one. Get to work.
If I can get you more patrons on Patreon, can I stop doing this?
You know what? Sure. But I doubt you'll be able to pull that off. I want this done today. This should have been done months ago, but you told me your kids had died.
Well, they did.
Because you ate them!
Don't oppress me for my own culture!
Just get it done.
My revenge will be swift and horrible, old man. Swift and horrible. Welcome to this review. I am the Bird. You will learn my name when I deem you worthy of it. Today, we're looking over the Funko Savage World ThunderCats figures. And if you're worried about my knowledge of this franchise and that it won't be up to snuff, don't worry. I've been living with this nerd for so long that I have about as much info on this as he does through sheer osmosis. Now, we have both waves here with a decent assortment of characters. They're in the classic 5.5 scale and match most original Masters of the Universe figures in scale. They all have 6 points of articulation each, 2 shoulder joints, 2 leg joints, a waist joint, and 1 neck joint. I'd show you how they work, but I don't have any hands. Use your imagination. Moving individually, we'll start with the first wave. Lion-O comes with a longsword version of the Sword of Omens and a claw shield. However, his skin tone makes it more like he rolled around in Cheeto dust, and his claw shield is furry, despite the cartoon and other media always depicting it as metal. I will admit, though, that the way the claw shield is attached is a nice throwback to the original LJ and Lion-O figure. The biggest gripe, though, is the sword itself and how it sits in his hand, meaning that it doesn't sit well. There's just so much on the inside of the hand that the sword has to sit at an angle, and the sword itself is just ridiculous. It looks like they used a mixture of the bootleg stainless steel sword from the early 2000s and the costume sword from 2013 for inspiration instead of actual show model stuff. The symbol bothers me too, but we'll go over that in a bit. Here he is compared to other versions of the character. Next up, let's look at Slythe. Characters like this is where the buck suffers the most. It clearly doesn't fit the character and slips into creepy, uncanny valley very quickly. There's also the fact that his color palette is actually brighter than it should be, and he can't hold his axe but in one way, and it's very awkward. There's also the fact that his legs come off easily, but I'll address that later. Here he is with the original LJN version, which is somehow less creepy looking. Mumm-Ra the Everliving is next, and while he's actually supposed to be taller than everyone, I don't mind this so much. I like the fact that for the first time, we have a full classic Sword of Plundar, though I wish it were bigger. My biggest issue here is the fact that Mumm-Ra's head was so tight that it literally snapped off. Way to lose your head. And here he is compared with the other versions of the character. Lastly, we'll talk about the best ThunderCat, Panthro. This mold suits him the best, but he also has the biggest problems. The nunchucks are really bad, and the paint on the chain chips right out of the box. If you want to sub something in, the Loyal Subjects Panthro nunchucks work great, and so do the original LJ and Panthro nunchucks. Here he is with other versions. Now, let's talk about the issues here. Firstly, the first wave here had some major QC issues with the joints, mostly the leg joint snapping off completely, and mostly with Panthro. Granted, he's tough enough that he'd probably beat you to death with it given the chance, but for $15 each, this was avoidable. But there are bigger issues, like the fact that the card art for both Mumm-Ra and Slythe sported their 2011 designs, and the biggest offender, the ThunderCat symbol. You can see this best when we zoom in on Panthro. See, that's not the correct logo. That's a fan edit. Now, one would assume we should get angry with Funko for this, right? Well, it actually gets worse. When Lio reached out about this on Facebook in the 5.5 group, he got this response from a Funko staff member. That response being that they have to work with what the licensor gave them. Yes, people, this means Warner Brothers, one of the biggest corporations on the planet, just ripped the wrong logo for their property from Google. It's been stated on this channel that perhaps whoever is in charge of the ThunderCats license for Warner Brothers is stupid, but this confirms it. But let's see what happened with Wave 2. Let's start out with Jackalman. From the front, he looks fine, but when you move him into profile view, He looks like Jackal-Man as played by Danny DeVito.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bang!
His weapon is, I'd imagine, supposed to be based on the episode The Shifter, where he used Slide's axe as he and Slides had their brains switched. But it has extra spikes on the back, and the shaft is so thin, he can't even grip the thing. Why didn't they just give him his club? It would have been a lot simpler. This literally looks like the kid that loses the figure's weapon, so he finds another loose weapon from another toy line to try and make it work. So that's what I'm going to do here. There. Perfect. And here he is with other versions. Let's go on now with Monkeyin. Overall, pretty solid. My only complaints is that the skin tone looks too corpsey, and I could have done with more white around the chest. I also wish he came with his shield. Here he is next to his other version. Next up, we have Cheetara. Now, she looks okay, and in general is a good representation of the character from the show in this toy form. However, the problem with this mold becomes abundant when it comes to her weapon. Firstly, it looks like they just molded a bamboo skewer out of plastic for it, and it's way too thick. There's also the fact that she can't really hold it like a staff should be held. If you move her arms, her own body will knock the staff out of her hand. Did literally anybody look at this beforehand? You could have just slightly rotated the hand where she can just hold the staff like the LJN figure. Couldn't even get that right. Here she is next to her other versions. Finally, we get Tygra. And honestly, despite the fact that his color palette is wrong, something common for Tygra figures, I'm afraid, I really like this. He can hold his whip all right for display, everything is clean and crisp, and overall, he is a pretty figure. And here he is next to his other versions. Have they improved since the first wave, though? Actually, yes. Firstly, I have yet to hear of any QC issues. The card art is also representative of these specific versions of the characters, and they even finally got the symbol right. Wonderful. Now, would I recommend these? No. And here's why. The QC problem in the first waves means buying any of these is a literal gamble. Schrodinger's ThunderCat, along with the other issues that were listed with Wave 1. And while Wave 2 has made some serious improvements, I can't really put a stamp of approval on that either, except maybe Tygra. They retail at around $15, and you know what else does? The Loyal Subjects ThunderCats figures. While smaller, there's more variation, and they have 10 points of articulation, whereas the Funko figures have 6. If you're a hardcore collector, then I suppose you could just get them. Or if you have the mindset of an 8-year-old and simply must have a completely different show blending with a 35-plus-year-old toy line. But overall, I'd say, do what you want. I'm not your dad. That's it for this episode. Next episode, I'll be reviewing the DVD releases for the original ThunderCats. I'd also like to thank the patrons Avis, Hateful Tate, Harry Partridge, Norden, Busy Robot Hands, William Brady, and Jonathan Randabuller. You should all go become a patron so I don't have to keep degrading myself like this. I'm a bird. I have standards. Later.
You know, it's going to be super awkward if his wife ever walks in on this. Just saying.